I'm 28F and I'm a dentist. I met this guy, Ethan, 28 million, on a dating app. And after a few dates, I started noticing some things that really didn't sit right with me. Our first date was at a trendy bar, and Ethan ordered a ridiculous number of expensive drinks for himself and his friends, putting it all on his tab without asking if I even wanted anything. I just stuck to water, and he made a comment about it, saying, "Don't worry, I like a girl who knows her limits. It's cute." He gave me a wink, but honestly it felt condescending, like he was looking down on me instead of being kind. On our second date, we went to a loud nightclub, and Ethan spent most of the night chatting up other women while I was getting us drinks. It was super obvious that he was flirting with a blonde woman in a tight dress. When I came back, he didn't even notice I was standing there for a few minutes. When he finally saw me, he grabbed his drink without saying thank you. I told him I was uncomfortable, and he just brushed it off, telling me I needed to loosen up and learn to have some fun. That really put me off. For our third date, we went to a regular restaurant for dinner, but it felt more like a job interview with him talking about his family's wealth and his plans for taking over the business. He barely asked anything about my career or life, and then he said something that really rubbed me the wrong way. He said, "Dentistry? Huh, that's cute. My mom always wanted me to marry a doctor, but I guess a dentist is close enough. She'll be thrilled." At that moment, I realized we were on completely different wavelengths. I enjoy quiet evenings reading, while Ethan is all about bars and clubs. I have no issue with people who love to party, but it's just not my thing. I work at a prestigious hospital, so I'm doing well in my career, but Ethan was going to inherit his father's business, and it seemed like he was looking down on my job. After that, I stopped responding to his texts. He sent me a few, getting angrier each time, calling me boring and uptight, and accusing me of being jealous of women who know how to have fun. A few months later, I ran into him at a friend's birthday party. It was at a quiet, upscale lounge, which is much more my style. At first, Ethan just looked at me from across the room with a little smile, but then he came over and apologized for his previous texts. He said it was because he'd had a bad day and drunk too much tequila. He was being super charming, paying attention to me, and pretending to remember things I had told him about my job. He did get a few details wrong, but I figured he was at least trying. We spent the rest of the night together and left together, just as friends. A few days later, he asked me out again, suggesting a quiet dinner at a nice restaurant known for its food and wine. It seemed like he was actually trying to do something I would enjoy. He said, "I want to make it up to you. I know I messed up before." So, I decided to give him another shot. Things got more serious really fast after that. Ethan started doing these grand romantic gestures, buying me pricey gifts, and taking me on weekend trips. At first, it was impressive, but then it felt overwhelming. He bought me a designer handbag I would never have picked for myself and said, "Every woman deserves a little luxury." We were clearly two very different people. He kept mocking me for going to bed early and staying in, constantly making fun of what he called my old lady habits. He would tease me, saying things like, "You're going to turn into a pumpkin if you stay out past 10 p.m., Cinderella." We were together for a year before we moved in. He picked the apartment, a luxury high-rise in a trendy neighborhood, even though I had wanted something quieter and closer to my work. He brushed it off, saying, "Come on, babe, you'll love the views, and the amenities are insane." Living with him, I started seeing the reality of what his life was like. He spent his days playing video games and occasionally going to the gym, but weekends were reserved for partying. He'd go out to bars and clubs and then come home late, often waking me up when he stumbled in. There was one night when he brought a group of loud friends back at 3 a.m., even though I had to work early the next day. He just didn't seem to care about anyone else's schedule. His work life was equally strange. He went to his father's company office twice a week, but only if he felt like it. He was supposed to work from home the rest of the time, but half the time, he didn't even bother. The company was run by his father, and no one could tell Ethan what to do. It was clear he only had the job because of his father's connections, but he bragged about it, telling his friends how he had it made and didn't have to work hard. His father was still working there but kept telling Ethan he would inherit the business one day. Ethan had a business degree, but when I tried to talk to him about his work, he would dismiss me, saying, "As long as I'm getting paid, I don't need to worry about it. You wouldn't understand the pressures of a family business anyway. It's not like pulling teeth, sweetheart." I didn't argue with him. I knew he was bringing in money, so I just ignored his lazy attitude toward work and tried not to think too much about it. One evening, after a long shift at the hospital, I got home to find the apartment a mess. with Ethan sitting on the couch, playing video games. I asked if he had taken a look at the documents regarding our lease, but he brushed me off, saying he'd get to it later. "I'm in the middle of something important," he said, gesturing to his game. "Can't you see that?" I didn't push him, but my frustration started building. I've always been close to my parents, who are in their early 50s, and I've been helping them financially. It was something I wanted to do and could afford, so I paid their bills, helped them save for retirement, whatever I could. They never asked for it, but I wanted to make sure they were okay. Ethan and I kept our finances separate, and I hadn't told him about helping my parents, thinking it wasn't his business. A few months ago, though, he found out when my parents mentioned it during a visit. Ethan was acting visibly annoyed the whole time, making snide comments about how lucky my parents were to have such a generous daughter. He kept refilling his wine glass and completely ignored me whenever I tried to talk to him. Later that night, after my parents left, he blew up. He slammed a beer bottle on the counter, which startled me, and said, "You should have discussed this with me first. I'm not okay with you giving money to your parents behind my back." He told me I was hiding things from him, and that I needed to ask him before sending any money to my parents because we were a team now. He said, "You don't make these kinds of decisions without me." I was furious. I told him he had no right to control my money, and that I didn't owe him an explanation for how I spent it, especially since I was the one who earned it. I also pointed out that he never asked me how he spent his money, like when he bought drinks for his friends at the bar every weekend. "At least I'm not blowing my money on useless things," I said, acting like a spoiled frat boy. Ethan responded by saying, "What's yours is mine, and what's mine is mine. That's how partnerships work, babe." We didn't speak for a few days after that fight. I slept on the couch, and my unease started growing. Ethan eventually apologized, but his apology wasn't for controlling me. It was more about the misunderstanding. He said, "I'm sorry we fought. I just get worried about money. It's a family thing." He gave me a cheap bracelet as a gift, one that didn't look like anything I'd ever wear. I felt obligated to accept his apology, but inside I was still angry. A few weeks later, I suggested that we start saving for a down payment on a house, but Ethan laughed it off. He told me we didn't need to worry about that because his parents would probably give us a property when we got married. "Besides," he said, "you wouldn't want to live in some boring suburb, would you? You'd miss the city life." He didn't even ask what I thought about it. A couple of weeks after that argument, Ethan proposed to me in a very public, showy way at a fancy restaurant with a bunch of his friends there. He got down on one knee, holding a huge diamond ring, and said, "Well, my name, are you going to make me the happiest man in the world, or what?" Despite having mixed feelings, I felt like I had to say yes. I was busy with wedding planning and tried to forget about the argument. Ethan didn't help with the planning, leaving most of it to me and his mother, but he criticized our choices, saying they were too traditional or not classy enough. He didn't want a string quartet at the wedding, calling it so stuffy, and insisting on a DJ instead. He also insisted on having a huge ice sculpture, which I thought was completely unnecessary. The wedding was scheduled for 6 months after the engagement. We decided to keep living separately until then. But then, 3 days before the wedding, the night before, Ethan came over to my house. He was about to check into a nearby hotel, but first, he handed me a document and told me to sign it. He seemed uncomfortable, tapping his foot and avoiding eye contact, trying to rush me. "It's just some legal stuff," he said. "Nothing to worry your pretty little head about." At first, I thought it was just a prenuptial agreement, but then I read it. The document had 3 main clauses. After we got married, I wouldn't be allowed to give any money to my parents or any other members of my family. If we had children, they wouldn't be allowed to be alone with my parents until they were 18 years old. If Ethan or his parents thought it was necessary, I might have to cut off all contact with my family entirely. Ethan told me the contract was a necessary measure because of our previous argument about my parents' bills. He said that his father was retiring soon and that he'd be getting more money, and that he didn't want my parents thinking they were entitled to any of it. "We need to protect our assets," he said. "You know how families can be. They'll bleed you dry if you let them." He added that the clause about children was just a precaution in case my parents tried to use them against us. The no contact clause, he said, was for worst-case scenarios, and he assured me not to worry about it. He spoke to me like the contract was completely normal, just something that needed to be done. He kept pushing the pen toward me, urging me to sign it. I signed it, but I made sure to keep a copy for myself. Later that night, I couldn't sleep. My mind was racing. I kept going over the contract over and over, the words spinning in my head. The next day was our wedding. I went through all the preparations, pretending everything was fine. I got my hair and makeup done, put on the dress, and walked down the aisle, feeling detached, as if I were watching everything unfold from a distance. When it was time to say my vows, I asked my maid of honor for my purse. Everyone looked confused. They probably thought I was going to pull out my vows, but instead I pulled out the contract. I began reading the document aloud, making sure everyone heard each clause. I explained that Ethan had forced me to sign it the night before. I then told him, in front of everyone, that I wasn't in love with him. I called him a man-child, a selfish, controlling, entitled brat. I told him I refused to spend another minute of my life with him. I turned to his parents and called them privileged douchebags. Then I ripped the contract into tiny pieces and threw them at Ethan. One piece even landed in his mouth, and he sputtered, trying to call me back. He yelled my name, asking, "What the hell are you doing?" I grabbed my parents' hands. They looked shocked, but they squeezed mine tightly, and we walked out together. I didn't look back. We got into my parents' car and drove to my childhood home. It was a quiet ride. My mom was crying in the back seat, and my dad tried to comfort her. When we got home, I changed into something comfortable, an old sweatshirt and sweatpants, and took off all my makeup. I sat down with my parents, and my dad said he was incredibly proud of me. My mom was too emotional to say much, but she nodded and agreed with my dad, saying, "We love you, honey. We'll always be here for you." I've been staying at my parents' house ever since. That evening, Ethan called me, yelling and cursing, calling me a gold digger and manipulative. He said I had ruined his life. I didn't care anymore. I hung up on him. Then I got a tearful voicemail from the woman who would have been my mother-in-law. She said I had made a mockery of her and her family in public. According to her, the contract should have been rejected privately and not in front of everyone. She called me ungrateful and classless, accusing me of shaming their family. The entire message was soaked in tears, and it made me feel even more sure of my decision. So Reddit, was I really in the wrong here? Update 1. I wanted to quickly update you all after posting. I honestly don't think I did anything wrong. Maybe I was a bit impulsive and impractical, but that's different from being cruel, selfish, or disrespectful. I don't mind if some people disagree with me, but most people here seem to think I made the right call. I keep thinking back to that fight about the electric bill, and the more I do, the more certain I am I did the right thing. Ethan and I had to deal with the wedding costs that got canceled. He tried to make me pay more, saying it was all my fault and that he was losing a lot of money. He even threatened to sue me. I told him to go ahead and try. I don't regret losing the money. If I'd canceled the day before, maybe I could have saved some, but whatever. At least I have a crazy story to tell. Update 2. The caterers are finally paid off. It took a lot of arguing and even getting lawyers involved, but we split the costs in half. It's a relief to have that behind me, even if it was expensive. Ethan has blocked me. I found that out when I tried to message him about getting some of my stuff back. I'm feeling a lot of different things right now. I'm relieved, but I also feel empty. I spent years thinking we were in love, and now I don't know what to do without him. Part of me wants him back, which I know is ridiculous after everything, but I'm almost ashamed to admit it. I've been getting a lot of "you're so fabulous" texts from people, which is nice, but it doesn't really change how I feel. I'm just numb. I can't really talk to anyone I know about this because I don't want to make things uncomfortable for them. Does anyone have advice on how to deal with this kind of heartbreak? Update 3. It's been about a month since the almost wedding. I went back to the apartment to pack up the rest of my stuff. It was my last time there. Ethan wasn't home, but one of his friends, Troy, was. Troy let me and my friend in, but he seemed really uncomfortable. He made a few comments saying I'd overreacted and ruined something good. He also mentioned how Ethan was really messed up about all of this, and that he really loved me. As we packed up, I noticed some of my stuff was missing or damaged, like my favorite book with pages ripped out and a smashed picture frame. I'm pretty sure Ethan did it, but I didn't say anything to Troy. We just left quickly. Before we left, Troy handed me a note from Ethan. He said Ethan wanted me to have it, but didn't seem happy about it. The note was an apology. He said I'd always been even-tempered and shy, which made me realize he never really understood me. He acknowledged that we were both immature during the relationship, and that we cared more about being in a relationship than about each other. He said he hoped we'd meet again in the future when we were both in a better place. The letter was bittersweet. But honestly, I don't think we'll ever reconnect. The damage is done. The apology seemed sincere, but it didn't really address the root issue: his disrespect and need to control me. It felt like he was trying to make it sound like we were both equally responsible for what happened. I crumpled up the note and then smoothed it out again. I'm not sure how I feel about it. I've rented a new apartment near my parents' place. It's smaller and not as fancy as the old one, but it's cozy and peaceful. I feel safe here and relieved to be closer to my family. I'm focusing more on work now. I'm still sad, but I'm also looking forward to being single. Thinking about reading Ethan's letter stung. I know I made some mistakes, but I'm doing what's best for me now. Update 4. It's been 6 months since the wedding that didn't happen. I got a promotion at the hospital. I'm now the head of my department, which I think is because I can actually focus on my work now, without the constant stress from Ethan. My social life is much better. I've reconnected with old friends, and I've made new ones. I feel more confident and outgoing than I have in years. I even went dancing with my friends, something I never would have done when I was with Ethan. My relationship with my parents is stronger than ever. I'm still helping them financially, but now we have regular dinners together, and they're always there for me. Something surprising happened. Ethan's father contacted me. He offered me a job at his friend's dental hospital, saying my skills would be a good fit. He said he always thought I was a smart, good girl. I turned him down. It would have been a major conflict of interest, and I just don't want anything to do with that family anymore. Then, I ran into Ethan at a coffee shop near my new apartment. He didn't look great. He'd gained weight, and his clothes were wrinkled. He tried to talk to me, apologizing again, saying he missed me a lot. He told me he was having trouble at work and that his father might sell the company because Ethan can't handle it. He said he now realizes how much he messed up and how good I was for him. I was polite but kept my distance. I told him I'd moved on and wasn't interested in getting back together. I left without saying much more. I felt a little pity for him, but mostly I felt relieved that I'm not stuck in that situation anymore. This whole experience has made me realize how much I've grown and how much happier I am without his negativity and control in my life. It was a tough decision, but I know it was the right one. I feel at peace and have closure. Update 5. It's been a year since the wedding that never happened. I went on my first date recently. It was casual, just coffee with someone I met. It felt a little strange, but I was happy and excited, and only a little bit nervous. I've been going to therapy, and it's helped so much. My therapist has helped me work through everything with Ethan, rebuild my confidence, and learn how to set healthy boundaries. I finally realized my self-worth, and I'm actually looking forward to the future. If you've been through something similar or have advice to share, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Let's talk about learning from past relationships and moving forward stronger together.